guess what? What was printed in the paper printed program guide is not what we're doing today. We're doing something else entirely. And what was in the digital app is what we're really doing. And I appreciate and admire you people who are dedicated to paper and you know, keeping it old school, and you don't need to recharge it and all that kind of stuff. But here's what we're doing today. This panel is called All Killer, No Filler, Curation in Horror Streaming. So we have 4 experts who are going to introduce themselves in a moment, and we're going to be talking today about this idea of curating horror in a number of contexts. Things like on the streaming channel Shudder, but also for yourself, for your friends, all sorts of ways of curating streaming horror and other kinds of horror. So with that said, we're all really sorry, and now I'd like our awesome panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Amie.
Hello. I'm Amie Simone, not Simone, as it says in the app. If I was wearing a beret, might be different. I am the director of marketing for an agency called Smart House Creative, and we work with a lot of independent films. I also write for a couple of blogs, 3imaginarygirls.com, which is indie music and film, and ilovesplatter.com, which is my horror movie blog. And my shirt says, "Nominate Toni Collette, you cowards," just in case.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, I'm Heather Marie Bartels. I'm a film festival programmer and judge. Hi, I see you. I see some people I know in the audience. They're looking right at me. Nice to see you. I also host events around town. Usually it'll be a screening of a genre film, usually horror, and then we'll have a discussion after that will focus on film theory and kind of guiding the audience into a deeper deconstruction of film. You might know me from Shriek, from hosting events at Mopop, at Crypticon, at Bleeding Ham, generally around town.
Hello. I'm Adrienne Clark. I'm Mopop, the Museum of Pop Culture, formerly EMP Museums, content marketing manager. I also do cool stuff places on the internet, like for Nightmarish Conjuring and Horror Novel Reviews, which is awkward because it's about movies, not books. Don't worry about it. And yeah, I'm a firm believer every day is Halloween. So hello, spooky friends.
You're a Ministry fan. That's nice. Hi, my name is Clinton McClung. I'm a film programmer. I've been programming movie theaters and festivals for about 20 years now. I started out by curating a midnight movie series at a theater called the Coolidge Corner in Boston. Then I moved here, and now I work for the Seattle International Film Festival. I've hosted the monthly series Dark Lodge at the Arc Lodge Cinema down in Columbia City, which is a monthly horror film series, as well as currently producing, I'm not hosting, a series called Nocturnal Emissions at the Northwest Film Forum, which is a mixture of a classic horror film every month with live burlesque. And that's me.
Right on. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Who are you, Brooks?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My name is Brooks Peck. I'm senior curator at the Museum of Pop Culture, and I'm not a horror expert, which is why I'm up here asking them questions. Look over there. Always look over there, okay? That'll make me feel better. And let's all say goodbye to those paper people who left. I'm sorry. Again, we're sorry. Sorry. So first thing I want to bring up is now we're in this sort of new era. You have a streaming service like Shudder, which is on demand, and so there's horror on demand. Really different from I think what a lot of you have experience in, which is programming festivals, which are essentially a linear process. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could talk about the difference between those two things and what you gain from on demand or what you lose from on demand, what you gain having a linear film festival, what you might lose, things like that.
I want to say first off that while this is a Shudder panel, I have not been paid by Shudder or anything like that. So before I start spouting off about how much I love Shudder and how wonderful Shudder is and how important I think it is, I really need you all to know that while they are kind of sponsoring this panel, they haven't picked us because we were I don't know, sucking up to them or anything like that.
I don't even know what Shudder is.
Yeah, that's likely true.
No, I do.
Because he's old. That was the joke. Here's the thing. I think there was a wonderful change that happened when digital film became accessible, which was more people could take their project, something they had passion for, and they could create it, and they didn't need to go through the traditional process of Hollywood. They didn't need to get a ton of people involved. They could just pick up a cell phone and make a movie and get it out there. Of course, this is also a problem in that there wasn't a lot of quality control happening. And also, when these kind of changes happen, a lot of just shitty what are we rated here?
I'm looking for children.
It's a horror panel.
Yeah,
From
okay,
that
cool,
guy.
thank you.
So,
I just wanna-
PG-13.
yeah,
Okay, great, great.
I mean, we are. Yeah, it's horror. So
Just making
Unfriended, not Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
perfect, thank you, that's what I needed.
Say that again. What?
Unfriended, not, you wouldn't get it, you're not a horror person.
That's why I asked. I'm gonna write those titles down. Hang on.
So a lot of more kind of shitty production companies will jump on that and just start pumping things out just to make a buck. And so initially what happened with the streaming services is they became inundated. I don't know if you remember trying to watch or find horror films on Netflix for a while or on Amazon Prime. It was a garbage pile, hot, flaming garbage. And it was just nonstop, just looking through pages of nothing.
Can I just interrupt you the question? Why do you think those services accepted those burning garbage piles to show?
I don't think they cared about horror, and I don't think they thought we were going to care. That's just my guess.
Interesting.
And Shudder really has changed that. Shudder is highly, highly curated, and it's curated not just for a certain kind of horror fan, but there is a breadth to the kinds of film on there. There's deep cuts, there's splatter films, there's going to be more kind of atmospheric, chilling. So it's been a complete 180, and it's a one-of-a-kind service that hasn't existed in this digital age as of yet.
One of the things that was really interesting to me about the whole title of this panel is the idea of curation in the digital age. You think of streaming services like Amazon Prime and Netflix as just a place where you go and you can find anything you want, which is kind of not true.
Like a cafeteria.
Yeah, exactly. But curation is something that a specialty label can bring to the table that I think a bigger streaming service can't. One of the things I actually love about the rise of services that are a little more focused and a little more specialized. I'm thinking not just of Shudder, but also of Canopy, which is where you can go to find a lot of great art films. Criterion is starting their own channel soon. Even like the Disney one that's going to be starting up. You are able to pinpoint a little bit more what kind of films you're looking for, and there's a curatorial voice that is sort of turning you on to new stuff that I think would be harder to find in sort of the digital dump otherwise. And something that an algorithm can't really provide nearly as much as a sort of a human voice is. So in a way, the streaming services are moving a little bit more toward the traditional theatrical or festival model, where they're finding people to be like, yeah, these are films that we think you would really like and would really enjoy. And, you know, granted, sometimes it has to do with money. Like, here's what we're pushing this month because we spent a lot of money on this film. But that leads you down other rabbit holes, which I think is really creative and cool.
Yeah, there even is actually a curator character on the Shudder show, The Core.
That's right.
Hosted by Mickey Keating, that is this weird guy all in white that works at like a video store. And at the end of every episode, Mickey will go in and meet the curator and he'll give him a couple of recommendations. So they really do stress that they are curators.
That's kind of what I miss about video stores too, and I like that that's coming back to streaming services a little bit. You used to go to your video store and there would be like an employees pick section, or there would be like, here's our favorite horror films for October. And if you go to Scarecrow Video, you'll still find that. But that's something that you wouldn't get on a Netflix. And they're probably changing that model a little bit too. But that's something I like about the rise of, again, what I was saying, like the sort of specialty streaming services, I think are providing a really good service.
All right, so I want to get into another aspect of this, which is, so generally speaking, streaming services, you're at home, you're watching your laptop or your TV, and your TV might be huge, but it's not the same as the big screen experience. Do any of you think there's ever a case where, a film or a show just should be reserved for the big screen only, like a festival?
You go. You go.
Well, I mean, y'all should definitely talk. I think you don't know, well, as the viewer, you don't know until after you see it. Like, for me, well, right, but for me, the one that really stood out was on Netflix, I think, but it was The Ritual, if any of you saw that. That was shot for a movie theater. It just didn't get that release. And, like, you just don't know that until afterward. But, you know, the filmmakers didn't really have much say over that, I'm assuming.
Right.
I think
But
there's a funny attitude where a movie needs to be either for streaming or for theatrical, and that it can't be both. And most movies can be both. I mean, if you think about the history of us watching films in the 21st century, the movie would come out in a movie theater, and then it would come out on video, and then a lot more people would rent it and see it, and then eventually it would show on TV. We're still looking at that same model. It's just now there's a lot more. I kind of look at streaming video the same way I looked at direct-to-VHS movies that used to come out in the 1980s. But that was also, back then, was a sign that, like, nobody really supported this film or thought it was going to be the type of film that would gather an audience. They'd have to put together like a really crazy box cover and sell it as an insane thing that you would never see in your movie theater. And now that aspect has changed a little bit. But I know this isn't a horror film, but I think Roma is a great example.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah,
Yep.
of a film that definitely you should see it in a movie theater if you have the chance. Not just because it's bigger and it's beautiful, because there's an immersive quality to it. And there are some films, like Shudder just bought a film called One Cut of the Dead, which is going to be coming out later this year. Yeah, which is one of my favorite movies of the last year. And I'm not sure how it's going to play for people at home, because it's one of those films where part of the joy of that movie was watching it, not just on the big screen, but with an audience full of people and sort of going through the journey that you have over the course of the film. That's why something like Hereditary was fantastic to see in a theater. Like,
Yes.
there's a certain shocking moment in Hereditary when my wife went to the bathroom and
She
but
did it.
she did. She came back and was like, "What happened?" And I'm like, "I can't even."
When everyone was just dead silent.
But that was great. Like being in a theater full of people when that moment happened, and just having, like, being there and feeling the reaction from everybody was really magical and really wonderful. You're not going to have that same experience necessarily watching the film at home, but that doesn't negate the home viewing experience, in my opinion, because I also think a lot more people discover films that they wouldn't pay $20 to go see.
And the
Or-
accessibility of
yeah.
just getting to the markets that normally wouldn't have, Roma available.
Yeah.
In
Well, that-
Seattle, of course, we're going to have it, and we're going to make sure that it got to the Cinerama, and then it stayed
Yeah.
for an additional week because we loved it so much. But a lot of my family that's in Nebraska, they would have never heard of it.
And there aren't theaters all over the country that will play that type of film. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are able to get it to a Netflix or a streaming service, you're going to open up your audience base a lot more, and more people will have a chance to discover these films. And then maybe they'll be the same people who will be like, "Why aren't we playing this in a theater?" And bring it to your town.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also, sometimes you just want to sit in your jammies and eat junk food and watch a movie at home. And there's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
Like, maybe you don't want to go to the theater and spend, $45.
And I often do both.
popcorn.
Like I went to see Thor. I went to see Thor Ragnarok like twice in the theaters, and I've watched it twice at home.
In your
you know?
pajamas?
Yeah,
Yeah, my pajamas.
Yeah, in your Thor jammies.
Yeah, that is a thing that's like home and movie theaters are
Yeah.
like David Cronenberging together, because
Yeah.
like we go to the movies all the time and we're like, yeah, we're gonna go pay for these giant like Wall-E chairs and just like lay back. You're just like laying on a giant bed with a bunch of people you don't know, like
I love
essentially.
those new chairs. I
You've
love
actually
these
sold me
so
on it.
much.
That's
Yeah.
good.
But it's like, I mean, also, yeah, I mean, and then sometimes you're going to want that experience. Like, some of my favorite theater experiences were Snakes on a Plane, where people were just like passing beer cans around in the theater secretly and laughing. Freddy versus Jason, that was an amazing one to see in the theater. With
I do a lot of
packed audience.
archival films, and sometimes it's really fun to find an old film that people haven't seen on the big screen, but have maybe heard of. I did a screening last year of this great movie called Deathbed, The Bed That Eats.
Had that
Yes.
movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is kind of a sleeper film. It's a weird sort of
crazy.
art
God, that
horror
was the
film.
worst pun. Get out.
It's
Terrible. Terrible.
It's great. It's an awesome movie.
Yeah.
If you watch that film at home alone, you're going to have a different experience than watching it with an audience full of people who burst into there's a scene where one of the characters almost escapes from the deathbed, and then gets sucked back in.
Yeah.
And the audience was just on the edge of their seat the whole time, even though the scene is intensely long and kind of boring. And then by the end, just burst into applause. And I'm like, you're not quite going to have that kind of same emotional effect when you watch the film at home.
Yeah.
But again, I think a lot of people came to see a screening that we held because they'd heard about this film because it got released on Blu-ray a few years ago. It was streaming. You could watch it in a lot of different places. I think it was on Vimeo. So it had there was more awareness about this film. And I think some people who had seen the trailer or who had watched it even are like, oh, I get a chance to go see this in a theater. This is going to be fun.
I wish that I would have seen Mandy that. I wish I would have seen Mandy that way because I saw it at home and it's like one slow like push is how I experienced it, which is very hard when it's like you have your hot water bottle and your blanket. Like you start to get sleepy, and you can't do that in a movie theater. So I would have been much more focused.
That's
Yeah.
a really
Yeah, it was.
important
It
point.
was.
Something that I think doesn't come up a lot when talking about the importance of the theatrical experience is the movies that are kind of hard to get through if you have the ability
Yeah.
to look at your phone. Or, say the recent Suspiria remake, reboot, whatever you want to call it.
Reimagining.
There we go. Thank you. Reimagining.
Yes.
In the theater, you are kind of forced to sit there and be immersed in it and go through that kind of slow, deliberate pacing. We do have that freedom at home to wander. And, you're not going to be able to, a film like Jean Dielman wouldn't be able to exist. Sorry. Film school. It's a.
Own it. Own it.
Yeah,
That one was even over my head. I don't know.
It's an old French movie that is almost 4 hours long of a woman going about her day-to-day life in real time, like peeling potatoes, and it's a struggle. But then in the end, the payoff is worth it. I mean,
That does sound like a horror movie, though.
well, and it's so impactful, because you had to go through all of that. What happens at the end is stunning, and it's like a Criterion film. I highly recommend it, but you have to force yourself.
What's the title again?
Jean Dielman, and then it's her address. It's all in French. I'll post a link somewhere.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
look for it.
I wanted to bring up one more thing about, there is an advantage, I think, to watching films at home, though, is that you can, I watch a lot of films at home because I'm a film programmer. Part of my job is to find films that we want to play in the festival. I watch a lot of them by myself. I watch a lot of them on my computer. I don't feel like I don't get the film because I watch it that way. But then my impetus immediately is when I find a film I love is I want to show it to everybody I know.
Yes.
And so it's a great way to explore and discover new things. And then either, if you have the advantage of being a film programmer and you can play it somewhere and try to encourage people to come, then you can be like, I'm going to throw a movie party and make everybody come see this film. Or you can do the same thing at home, invite all your friends over, watch Slumber Party Massacre 2, which I just did a month ago, and just hoot and holler and have the best time. And the other advantage of home streaming, I think, is you can get high AF and not have to worry about getting home afterwards, which is my favorite way to watch a lot of movies.
So true.
In
Yeah.
Washington and Colorado.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Do it.
Any states.
We actually, my friends and I have bad movie days, just 4 of us, and we just get really drunk and watch stupid movies. And we had a deathbed
Oh, nice.
marathon where every movie had to be deathbed, there had to be some kind of bed. There's another movie called Deathbed that was made in the 90s.
There
that
are
is
2 deathbeds?
Terrible.
It's
Yeah.
a different one. It's not as good.
But
Couldn't be
it
good.
doesn't matter because you're drinking and it's like you're throwing your own Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah.
You're just making comments and
Which you're the queen of. You would I never felt that free until I went to your birthday and we did, it was Reanimator and From Beyond.
That
all
was
featured.
good.
Yeah.
I was there. That was good.
yeah. Every year I have a party at Scarecrow Video with some friends and I pick a double feature. So.
Yeah.
Another
Everyone
kind of
here is
curation.
invited, so come on. Come on down. So I want to steer us away from drinking just for a second, and
Oh.
because I think what we're touching on is a form of community, right? You have these communities that you watch films with, and I would like to get into this idea of a larger community. I think you can kind of get it with the old style video store with the staff picks and things like that. In the streaming age, is there a way to form community at all?
Who's going to bring up Joe Bob Briggs?
Guess you did.
Yeah.
Who's going to do it?
You did it.
You did it.
It's me. It's been such I think just a revolutionary idea, and people were so hungry for that.
Why don't you give a little context about that, for me?
Sometimes I
obviously.
say my sentences backwards, where I say the thing that's exciting before I tell you what the thing is, and you're going to forget by the time I get there. So Shudder has done this amazing revolutionary thing where they've brought Joe Bob Briggs, the king of drive-in film, TNT Monster Vision, back. But they've had his marathons live online, as live online events, creating this international, worldwide community of everyone coming together and watching these movie marathons all at the same time, getting online, tweeting, he's reading the tweets, at least Darcy the mail girl is, and responding to them, and you're messaging your friends, are you watching Joe Bob? And bringing that element back in that maybe you're not all invited to Amy's party, sorry.
No, you are. You are.
But we can all watch Joe Bob, and it was a smash success. I mean, it crashed Shudder the first time they did it, when people were furious that they couldn't get on and watch.
I think that goes back all the way even to Mystery Science Theater. When that show was originally on, there was a huge fan club and a fan base built up around that television show, and we would all, you would mail the fan club, you would be on this list, you would get newsletters, and then they held their first convention, I think maybe the third or fourth year that the show was on, and people came out of the woodwork to come experience that. And that was, I think, another example of building a community just by essentially all the freaks finding the thing that they love. And even if you're not all in the same room together, you can still feel like you're part of this bigger thing. And then, when the film, or when the show decided to, do crowdfunding to bring it back and bring it to Netflix, that was one of the most successful crowdfunding efforts of all time. I think second to the Veronica Mars movie, to bring a show back because that fan base was still there, and there was still a community of people who were like, and now they tour around, they do live shows more often than they used to because there's people in every city that, again, it's that sort of the live experience versus seeing something at home. They really go hand in hand. You experience it at home several times, you love it, and then you have a chance to go out and see it with a group of people. And sometimes meet a famous person, or see a burlesque performer, or do some weird add-on, like give everybody ghost popsicles or something when they show up at the theater. And you already love the thing so much, you're like, yeah, I totally want to go do that. Let's go do that.
One of the aspects of the Joe Bob marathons that I think is significant is that you don't know what he's going to show in advance. So it's like real TV, like that you turned on and turned off if you forgot to save the TV guide on Sunday. So everyone's forced to be ignorant together, So nobody knows what's coming. It's definitely going to be Silent Night, Deadly Night. It has to be Silent Night, Deadly Night. We all find out together. It's nuts, So
it was Phantasm for Christmas.
Yeah.
Blew our mind.
It's a great Christmas movie.
Yeah,
I'm wearing my Phantasm shirt right now. I'm ready for the holidays.
We're ready.
Yeah, let's bring it.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's special because then, you don't know what you're going to have an opinion about. So then you have to reach out.
Can I tell you guys a Phantasm story?
I wish you would.
So we just did a screening at Northwest Film Forum last month of Phantasm because one of the advantages of the digital streaming era is a lot of great old classic films are now being remastered for digital.
And that restoration is amazing.
It's a beautiful restoration, all new soundtrack. The advantage to that isn't just that you now can get a beautiful Blu-ray to take it home or it can go on streaming services or anything. It means it's available for movie theaters again. Because for years, the only way you could play these movies was to find a print. And if they hadn't made a new print in a long time, or all you could get was an old scratchy print, or they just didn't have one, you just couldn't show that movie. And with digital restoration, it's made digital exhibition being the way everything is now. There's a huge catalog and library of films that are available to us at cheaper and more easy to book and more fun to screen. So anyway, we got to bring Phantasm back with the new 4K restoration. We were playing it at Northwest Film Forum. There's a scene in the film where there's a very loud explosion. I won't spoil what it is for anybody. The moment that happened, the new soundtrack was so strong that one of the speakers at the front of the theater blew off of the wall and crashed onto the stage. And everybody thought it was part of the show.
Nice.
It was great.
And you were like, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
We planned that.
This is why you come to the theater. Something might explode.
You might get killed.
But yeah, the whole point of that story was that, because of streaming services, because of like the boutique Blu-ray labels like Vinegar Syndrome and Shout Factory and others that are out there, they're making these films more accessible, not just to us at home, but also in the theaters.
coming back to that community thing we were talking about in the larger scale, I'm curious now, are there ways that you all try and create that a sci-fi birthday party, which is great, and I loved it, locally? I mean, you've talked about it somewhat, Quentin, but Amie, I'm especially curious about your own, because you're on at work and you market these kinds of films, like, are you thinking about community when you're doing that?
Well, sure, but I'm looking at it from an online community perspective,
Sure.
In terms of building those social pages and targeting the right people to find those films, mostly on demand. Some theatrical screenings, but mostly on demand. But I also think, like, in order to get people, and Clinton knows this, in order to get people to come see your film, you have to do something special, right? Whether it's showing a film that hasn't been shown in a long time in the theater, or eventizing it in some way, or giving out cool swag. Like, one of my prized possessions is like a bag of birdseed from the Dark Half, Stephen King's The Dark Half. And then I also have the pen from, why I cannot read, the Wes Craven Plane movie.
Red Eye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Red Eye. There's like a scene
Yeah.
where a kid stabs somebody with a pen, and it's the pen, the Frankenstein pen. But Clinton, you've thrown some not horror movies necessarily. Well, you have, but like I'm thinking of like Clueless, the Clueless screening.
Oh yeah, where we did makeovers in the middle of the film. That was
Makeovers
fun,
and
yeah.
gave out fuzzy pens and.
Well,
you know.
we did a screening of They Live right after Trump got elected, and I thought it'd be really fun to go and actually print up, like have made our own sunglasses that said They Live and that said Obey on one side and They Live on the other, and that was like the free thing you got when you bought a ticket, and people were really excited just to get the sunglasses. They were like happy and willing to come to a screening, because they love this movie and it's so fun to see in an audience, and that movie is so fun to see with an audience, especially. The way people react to the fight scene is just the best. But then, you get a little keepsake. You get something to take home to remember this by. And it seems like that is an idea that was only used from a marketing standpoint when movies were originally released. But I think one thing that we've all learned is with the rise of geek culture is that we want this stuff. Like, I want something to remember this thing that I love and this thing that I want to do. And if it's a part of the ticket, that's an even better deal, in my opinion. But yeah.
The reason that I started really getting into some of the projects that I've done, like Shriek, and then an upcoming project I'm going to be doing called Reign of Terror, is my background is a lot of like academic, more kind of leaning. I have a cinema studies bachelor from the University of Washington. I'm about to start a master's program with them in cultural studies. And in my experience, the community that I'm really a part of are people wanting to talk about the movies they see. What do you do after you leave a theater is you spend the next, hour plus with the people you just saw the movie with talking about it. And
drinking, sorry.
There you go, and drinking, sorry, we have to bring that back, and drinking. You're laying in bed that night and you're like, oh, I just thought of another thing, and this character, or this, and the movies that you love and that you want to revisit, those are the ones that you're really just thinking about for years or decades even. The movies that stick, like The Exorcist, those are the ones that just stick with us. And so the films that I tend to program for Shriek or for now Reign of Terror are those films that people have been thinking about for years, or maybe they did just see in a theater like Hereditary and they just want to talk about it so badly, but maybe they think all their friends are idiots. And they went home and they tried to talk about it with their friends and they were like, I don't know, I thought it was dumb, or I didn't get it. And they want to come together with a community of people that they feel are more like-minded, that are going to really, if they've ever heard like, you're reading too much into it, that's the worst thing. When you're so excited about a movie and someone tells you you're reading too much into it. And so getting that community, once someone's come to like that experience, they get hooked. And suddenly we have people returning. And even if I go to different venues, when I would go to the Central Cinema or go to a convention, we'd have people following us wherever we went, just because they wanted to see the next movie. They wanted to talk about Pet Sematary. They wanted to talk about whatever the new exciting horror movie was with that group of people that they knew were like on their level. But it was very welcoming, very accessible. We weren't snobby. I can be snobby, but I'm really good at hiding it.
That made me think a little bit about the sort of the educational aspect of curating, which is especially, like, Shudder comes to mind especially because of the documentary Horror Noir, which was a really excellent documentary exploring basically black voices in horror film and how that's changed over the decades. But it was also, that documentary was an education for a lot of people to discover films that had sort of fallen below the radar that they hadn't known about before. And then they created a whole channel there where you could watch a lot of the films that were referenced in those movies. And I think that's a great thing that you can do with a streaming service or with a video store even, to expose people to new films through that sort of curatorial voice. But again, because of that, there's this great film, Ganja and Hess, one of the first horror films made by a black filmmaker that was never really released in the US and was finally reissued on Blu-ray a couple of years ago. Shudder brought that movie back when they released Horror Noir. I did a screening of it at Northwest Film Forum about a month after that, and we had a huge audience. And part of the reason we had a huge audience is people had finally heard about this film. And we're like, oh, we want to go see that. And so, and we asked people there in the audience, like, who had seen Horror Noir, who had heard about this film through Ganja and Hess, and a lot of people had. And even though the film was then available to stream right away on Shudder, they saw it was screening in their, you know, in their community, and were like, oh, let's go see it. I'm really interested in this. So I feel like all of these modes of watching films sort of play hand in hand with each other.
It sounds, what I'm hearing is that this kind of curation is an opportunity to do some work in diversity and inclusion and equity.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that anywhere else or in the work that y'all are doing?
I'm seeing a lot more interesting and diverse voices in the curatorial sphere. It's been, I think it's no secret to horror fans that it's been a white dude's world for a long time. Yeah. And the number of female voices that I'm seeing coming forward now and saying, we love horror, we want to have a voice in this, we want to, you know, showcase films that we love and why we love them, has really changed. I actually stepped down as the horror curator for SYFY last year because I found a new curator to come in. Her name's Colleen O'Halloran. She has great taste. I love her taste in horror films. I actually was like, let's, yeah. I was like, I want her to come in. She has a fresh perspective. She's searching for these new voices that I'm not even aware of, and I'm just sort of like the secondary now. And I think we need to support more of those people and more voices. Yeah, what do you guys have to say? Don't let me mansplain.
Well, no, I just, you know, I'm Gen X, and so I grew up in a time when if you were a girl or a teenager who liked anything, any kind of fandom, you were kind of like frowned at by all the dudes in that fandom. So horror in particular, but I mean Star Wars, you know, whatever you name it, but it's like horror in particular. I was just thinking about this today. Like when I was a preteen and Friday the 13th 3D came out, and the horror novelizations were like a big deal at that time, right? And so in these novelizations, they would have pictures of the murders in the movies. And so like, they get passed around on the bus, but like all these boys would be passing around this novel, and I'd be like, I want to see it. But the thing is, as a girl, you weren't supposed to look at it like me and be like, this is amazing. I can't wait to see this. You were supposed to look at it and be like, oh, it's gross. I'm so scared.
You bugs.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, you know, in some ways it's changed a lot, and I think like online communities have helped with that. The Instagram horror community is amazing and very supportive of women, but in some ways it hasn't. I mean, if you look at the comments on the new Shudder podcast, for instance, it's called She Kills, and it says it's hosted by Adrienne Barbeau. It's actually more like narrated by Adrienne Barbeau, but it's cool, still listening to Adrienne Barbeau. But it's all women talking about horror, and the first episode is Corinne Kusama, and I'm gonna lose the name of the other person. Emily Deschanel from Bones. And they're talking about, you know, Corinne Kusama's talking about how when she makes films, she's always thinking about a larger picture of things that are going on in the world. And they mentioned the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and, you know, the Me Too movement, and they're talking about all these things. If you go look at the comments on the Shudder page or on the iTunes reviews, there are a bunch of people on there, mostly men, that are saying, why are you talking about this? You're supposed to be talking about horror movies. Why are you talking about Kavanaugh? Why are you talking about Me Too? Because it's all related, you know? But that's why we need women's voices in all film, but in horror in particular, because we need that fresh perspective. Coralie Fargeau's Revenge. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen. And it's the only revenge movie I've ever seen that doesn't have that male gaze. I didn't feel gross looking at that character, even though she's gorgeous, and they definitely show you that she's gorgeous. It's a whole new world when you see it from a female perspective.
So just on a lighter note in regards to needing more of like, when you said something in regards to needing women in the writer's room, and I was thinking of the Key and Peele sketch on Gremlins 2.
That's a good one, yeah.
Just when they're, the idea of like, the only thing that a woman could bring to the film is like, could we have a lady gremlin?
And
he's like,
they
yes.
did.
Yes, that's why we need more women in the writer's room. And of course, that's not it. There is a very unique perspective that you're going to get, and you can always tell. This is something that I think is really evident in the film American Psycho. That film is a female gaze, and not just because it's incredibly lovingly going over Patrick Bateman's body. That's because that's how he views his body, and that's why it's shown that way. And there's so many moments in that film that you can see the difference of how everything is treated because it is a female gaze instead of a male gaze. And unless you talk about the world at large, and unless you have women behind the camera, you're never going to know the difference, and you're never going to see that. And it's all related. Nothing exists in a bubble.
Yeah. But I mean, also, for a long time, horror film, it was just shunted to the side as like slasher, just everything is a slasher and nothing serious. It's not talking about any bigger issue. Sometimes it's not, but there's always some reason for it.
The stereotypes about horror have rarely ever lined up with the actuality of horror, such as people that are watching horror are just, men. That's never been true. That's never been true.
No.
So much of horror viewership has been women. All the women in my family have always been huge horror fans. It's always been me, my grandma, my mom, always watching horror. And if you read, of course, the famous pop horror book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, they delve into that. Carol Clover delves into that. She delves into that. And the idea that horror is slashers. Slashers is a very narrow field of horror. There's so many other kinds of horror films, and it was just a small sliver of time that was even the most popular kind of horror film.
It's also funny how they negate the fact that some of the biggest films in cinema history were horror films. Jaws, The Exorcist, Silence of the Lambs. These were horror films.
Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead, movies that everybody wanted to see. Horror is not a niche. And horror films usually, and I think this is one of the reasons why Jordan Peele's films have been resonating so much with people, not just because they're, from a voice of people of color, it's because they're referencing what's going on in our society. You put it through a horror lens and it becomes entertaining, but at the same time you're like, oh, but shit's happening, And that's one thing that horror film can do that a good drama can't do. It's hard to get people to come see a film about a hard subject if they're just, it's a downer. You don't want to go out and do that necessarily. But if you can put it in, I like to say it's taking your medicine wrapped in sugar. And I love that. That's my favorite experience is like, oh, this is great, this is fun. And then you watch a movie like Mandy and afterwards you're like, oh my God, that whole movie is about dealing with grief. And you're not thinking about that during the film. And then afterwards you think about it for a minute and you're like, whoa, that was some heavy, you saw a person's skull you saw his wife burned up and her skull get crushed in front of him. He is a damaged person after that point. So yeah, I think that part of horror film gets negated a lot, except for a long time, only in academic circles. And now I feel like that's reaching out into the mainstream a lot more because these films are becoming less marketed in like that weird, sleazy way.
Yeah.
And thank you for distributors like A24 and Neon and all these great film distributors that are classing up the joint by treating them like real movies, which they are.
Yeah, and bringing it back to the horror noir discussion that we were having earlier, after I watched that, I rewatched Tales from the Hood, which is something that I saw when it came out, and I was like, this movie's kind of stupid and silly, right? But watching it now, I'm like, holy crap. They talk about everything.
I watched Death by
they talk
Temptation
about
afterwards.
all kinds of issues. And in particular, there's a senator or governor that's kind of Trumpian that gets his just due. But yeah, I mean, that's I think the service that, like we've said over and over, that Shudder is serving is to bring these films to the forefront that people might not have heard of, or you might not know of because you don't have a video store anymore. I mean, we're lucky that we have Scarecrow and we have Reckless, but that's it. That's all
That's
we
it. We
have.
have 2
A lot
video
of cities
stores in this
don't
town.
have
Yeah.
any video stores, and there's nowhere for them to go to get recommendations or to see something. So having something online like Shudder is pretty invaluable.
This is awesome, and I'd really like to see if we have any questions from the audience. All right, do we have any questions in the audience or comments? Yeah, you're walking up.
Oh, there's a mic.
Feels
know.
so
Hey
there.
official.
Fancy
Very
panel.
official.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is the mic working?
yeah.
Cool. I think as kids, young kids, especially impressionable, it's an easy mark for things that might, I don't want to say scar, but things you remember forever, like Oliver and Hardy, Babes in Toyland, mess with my head. The winged monkeys in Wizard of Oz.
Totally.
And the worst of all, the freaking clown in Poltergeist reaching out from under the bed.
That
For sure.
Still terrifying.
And I think you lose some of that as you mature and grow into adults. You're not as open to being scared like that anymore. Is there anything that has done that for you guys?
In like recent time, as adults?
As adults.
Oh.
Yes.
Hereditary.
What?
Oh, Hereditary.
The whole movie.
I can't tell what you're saying.
I still have nightmares about the first Paranormal Activity. There's a scene where basically the creature, whatever it is, grabs the woman and drags her out of her bed and down the hall, and her husband wakes up as it's happening and freaks out, and the door's. I think about that every night when I'm going to bed, and I'm just like, if that ever happens to me, I'm gonna freak the F out and die.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, like there'll just be a scene, a moment like that will grab you and just won't let go.
For
Got
me,
one?
yes, I figured it out. So for me, like I don't worry about ghosts and stuff. It seems like kind of a waste of my time personally. If they're there, that would be crazy, and I will deal with it then. But what is my biggest fear, and what makes me feel sickest, is when people are forced to lose their dignity. That's true horror for me. So like,
Black Mirror.
yep, fucking a pig. Sorry. Yeah, that is true horror. Like you are losing all of your dignity. So that's one of the scariest things I've seen in a long time. Like raised my anxiety levels very high. And then Green Room, which like people try to fight me on it being a horror movie. It's like
Oh, don't even get me started on genre policing.
if you want to see a movie where
That
there's
is straight up
nothing supernatural, it's them versus us, them being Nazis, us being a punk band, and not being cute at all.
Yeah.
So that'll scare you. Or it scared me.
Have any of you guys seen Buried with Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah, I saw it in the theater.
I couldn't sleep the night after I
Yeah.
saw that film. I was just
Surprisingly
like,
good.
Claustrophobia horror.
claustrophobia. Ugh. Yeah.
When I saw the Gore Verbinski's version of The Ring, the U.S. version of The Ring, I had just graduated high school, and I had, even though I'd always been this big horror fan, I mean, I don't think anyone had really been exposed to much international horror at that point, especially like J-horror. That was kind of when it started coming over. And that was the first film that just fucked me up. And I could not sleep. And I wasn't even afraid of things that would make sense based on the movie. I was afraid of like any reflective surface that night, like mirrors and TVs and like pools of water. And I ended up getting a Xanax prescription because I just couldn't sleep.
Wow.
And I ended up writing my undergraduate honors thesis on the Ring films years later because that is just my passion. It's like, what can get into people's heads that much?
Can I tell you how I saw the original Ringu?
I would love for you to.
A friend of mine gave it to me on an unlabeled VHS tape
No.
and said,
That's
"You should
perfect,
watch
though.
this crazy Japanese
Yes.
movie tonight."
Yes.
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 That was the meanest trick
Yes.
he'd ever played on me, and I thank him for it every day.
That's so
awesome.
good.
Good.
It's so good.
Yes, sir.
So, early in my life, when I was younger, I got introduced into giallo films, like mainly Suspiria. And that was something very brand new to me, other than Hellraiser or The Leprechaun or
Yeah.
Poltergeist. Because giallo films are a very different genre than what we see in American horror films.
I think the interesting thing about giallo films, one of the reasons I love them, is because They are, technically you could call them slasher films in a sense, but they definitely bring that European art house sensibility to the slasher genre and make it somehow that slowness and the beauty of the filmmaking makes the moments of terror even more, stand out even more so. I think one of the thing I love about Giallo, other than how beautiful it looks, is that they also are really intense sound mixes on most of them. We just, before the new Suspiria came out, we did some screenings of the original Suspiria, and just sitting in a theater and hearing the soundtrack, the score by Goblin, sort of ricochet around the auditorium, really physically and emotionally affects how you react to what's going on screen. They are a fantastic sort of subgenre of horror that I absolutely love.
Were any of you at that live Goblin in October?
Yeah.
Goblin performed the soundtrack to Suspiria live while the film was playing in the background here in Seattle, and it was life-changing. It was so good.
Context for that, for anyone who doesn't know what Giallo is, it's an Italian style of horror film, primarily, I think 60s through 80s is what you'd call that, and Giallo actually means, probably some of you know this, yellow in Italian, and so these films got that name because a lot of the kind of pulp paperback books of the time had yellow backgrounds, and then it would have some lurid image. And so the markers of that is there's usually people investigating some sort of
Murder mystery.
Yeah, happenstance. They're not usually detectives. There's lots of very, beautiful blood and a lot of really groovy soundtracks by this band Goblin. So that's kind of the context there. And yeah, you're not going to see anything else like that. And I think we would be probably, knowing horror fans, we'd probably all just be like, "Nee, you can't do it as well as them." If people tried.
I disagree, actually. I think those films have been hugely influential on today's horror filmmakers.
Oh, sure.
If you think about a movie like Mandy, that's a Giallo film, and artists
Strange Color of Your Body's Tears.
Yeah, or Peter Strickland, he has a new film coming out later this year called In Fabric, which is about a killer dress. That is one of my favorite Giallo films of all time. And he's, in a sense, some of these filmmakers start out sort of mimicking the style, but then it also becomes their voice. And that, it's adding a really interesting level to horror filmmaking.
Thank you, sir.
I was just wondering if there's been any film that you've been really excited for and you really wanted to show to people, and then you were surprised when they were not thrilled by it or hated it. And if so, what were those films?
I feel like Clinton and I kind of have a fun thing about this, or at least I think he forgot about it, but then I remembered it.
Go ahead.
You want me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a really huge fan of the film Sleepaway Camp. And when, a long time ago, Clinton superglued my fingers together when I was just an audience member at a screening for Cheap Thrills. And he told me that rubbing alcohol or, was it nail polish remover, would get it.
Look, that's what I read online.
Yeah, it's not true. And so I had to sit there through this whole movie with, he wanted to actually superglue my fingers to my ears. And I was like, no. So he did them like this, and I just had to pick it off. But it ended up getting me an internship with Clinton later at SYFY. So that worked out, because I emailed him later, and I was like, hey, remember me? Superglued my fingers together. And here
She volunteered, by the way.
I did, and I got free movie passes. So I ended up working with him for a while, and I was like, let's show Sleepaway Camp. And he had said, I've tried, and it never works. Every time I've tried, no one comes out.
I tried to show it a few times at the Coolidge in the Midnight series. I tried to show it once at Central Cinema, and it was the kind of thing where it wasn't that people showed up and didn't like it, it's that nobody came.
And so it kind of became this passion project of mine to be like, I'm gonna find a way to show Sleepaway Camp and to get people to come and like it. And I ended up finding exactly, I think part of it is the right time as well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people were like, I want to come and talk about that movie and that ending right now. It is time for us to discuss what happens in that film. And programming it in Shriek was the time for people to come. And I like to come and help people unpack that. And we always sell out our screenings of Sleepaway Camp. So I'm not saying that's your answer, but that's one that I feel like we have a good bond over.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this movie, this anthology called ABCs of Death that was released several years ago, and we did a screening of it and got so much hate mail afterwards because...
In the mail?
Yeah, no, email. Because audiences came to see that film, and what they were expecting was a light, fun sort of horror romp, alphabetical themed, and then there were some scenes there was like a really creepy child molestation scene. There was a scene with a dog, and what was really eye-opening about that wasn't that people didn't like the film; it was that they saw things in the film that weren't there. Like we got a letter about. An email from a woman who was very upset that we showed, a child being raped on screen. And I was like, it doesn't actually, they don't show it. Right. It's all innuendo. And it was the same thing, like, you showed this man beating a dog. And I'm like, no, the guy who made that short film was a dog trainer. That was his pet. They don't show anything. It's just the magic of filmmaking, how you can make things a lot more disturbing so that in your head, what you think you saw.
Yeah, see, like, go back to Alfred Hitchcock. You don't actually see anyone get stabbed.
Yeah, exactly.
Editing.
And those are the kind of responses I'm always a little bit taken aback. I'm just like, wait, that wasn't what happened. But
For me, it's just like a lot of 80s movies that I grew up with and think are amazing, or funny, like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, or Night of the Comet, and
Who doesn't like those?
Well, I just, not everybody's taste is the same. I know that.
Amy, are there any films that you used to love that you revisit now and you're like, oh, what was I thinking?
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because I'm doing a new project on I Love Splatter where I rewatch all of the horror films I own, and so I am revisiting them. And American Werewolf in Paris is one that I used to love, love. And I still think that Julie Delpy and Tom Everett Scott are so adorable, but that movie does not hold up even a little tiny bit. And the CGI, no, like being conscious of 1997, like CGI, I know it's not the same as today, but oof, those werewolves were not scary.
Event Horizon.
Oh yeah.
I used to think that was the scariest film that was ever made.
Don't at me, it's so good.
And then I went back and rewatched it, and I think I've just seen too much now, and I'm like, it's a derivative piece of garbage. It just really destroyed me.
I'm going to save my tears. But no, it's okay.
Still like you.
Oh, thank you. That's nice. That's good. I like you too. What I love garbage. Like, oh, it's so good, warm and tasty and terrible. So like the worse, the better. And I collect a lot of it. And I feel like how I've been successful with my friends who are not ready to consume trash is just, it's all about setup. So you can't be like, it's a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, you liked that one? You have to be like, this is an incredibly homoerotic second pass at it, where there are gonna be like whippings and S&M and everybody's gonna act like it's not like what's happening, and like then you get people to be like, and I don't think Nightmare 2 is trash, so that was a bad example, but I don't know, if you prep people, they're usually more amenable.
Well, like From Beyond, because I showed that at my birthday party, but and Reanimator too. I mean, I had to preface both with like, especially in From Beyond, there's this whole weird S&M thing, and gets a little crazy, it gets a little sexist. But I think
we were just like, bring it on. Like,
it's that's the thing. I buy some bottles of wine, I have some snacks. It's like it's all a good. We're all there to make fun of it. We're not necessarily there to treat it in a scholarly manner or to dissect it.
But we loved it though.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. It's all context. It's all the way that you present it, right?
Yeah, it's all about.
But it's just sometimes that I might oversell something and then I show it to somebody and they're like, yeah, it's fine.
Wait, what about you, Clinton?
What are we talking about?
Answer your own question.
Disappointed you.
Oh, a movie that
when
the audience
you were younger.
disappointed.
No, that you loved and then you went back and revisited.
I can't think of a horror film recently that I revisited that I didn't like, but I rewatched Pretty in Pink not long ago.
Oh, I still love that.
Oh, no, yeah.
I did not like it at all. I did not think it was funny or charming or...
Really hard to root for Ducky.
It really is.
Well, it is hard to root for Ducky, yeah. But Iona, 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. But it's just like seeing those movies through different eyes sometimes. And there are a lot of films from a lot of like horror films and stuff I loved from growing up, especially in the 80s, that I have not wanted to revisit because in my head I'm like, that's probably going to be sexist garbage when I get to that. So I try to avoid those, and I'm trying to seek out those films that from that era that I missed. that I think would be more interesting. That's why recently I did watch all 3 sleepaway camp films because I never saw them when I was younger, and I did not realize until a few years ago that they were directed by women and that there was an interesting story behind like why these films existed and how they're different from the other sort of, I wasn't into those like, you know, there was a whole bunch of sleepaway slashers came out in the 80s, and it just wasn't my thing. And I was like, well, this one might be my thing. And I watched Sleepaway Camp 2 with a friend of mine, well, with Isabella Price, who's hosting the Nocturnal Mission series at Northwest Film Forum. We're showing that one as our finale next month because we're turning into a whole sleepover party. But anyway, we got together to watch it together. And after the movie, I was like, so how do you feel? Do you think this is a good one? And she was like, I'm crushing on the bad guy so hard right now, which was not the response I was expecting. And I was like, I just love watching these films through the eyes of younger fans who are experiencing them for the first time and seeing how they resonate differently across different decades. So, yeah, I hope I answered my question. No, Pretty in Pink.
Oh, you did say Pretty in Pink.
Yeah.
Okay,
Not a
that
horror
counts.
film, but kind of a horror film.
Yeah.
It is now.
It is now.
It is if you're Asian American, it's a horror film. So.
No,
That's 16 Candles.
No, and I
That's
was gonna
terrible.
say, it's really funny because if you watch 16 Candles, you have this awful representation of, I don't
Yeah.
think, he wasn't Asian American, but
Yeah,
you have,
he
you
was
know,
a transfer student or something.
yes, but then you've got Night of the Demons, that is this incredible, like, the entire cast is just diverse, and it's, like, not a thing, and they're wonderful.
And Night of the Demons is so interesting, too, because one of the characters is such an incredible douchebag. Like, the most horrible mansplaining man you'll ever see in a movie, and he's only one of the characters instead of, like, most of the characters.
Yeah.
And then when he dies, you feel so good.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, like the entire cast of that film is going to be, and not actually the entire cast, several members of the cast of that film are going to be at Crypticon this year.
Oh, great.
It's going to be really exciting because it's going to be all about that.
That was a movie that was better than I remembered it. you
Me
know?
too, yeah. Hashtag me too.
I'm the context queen. If you're interested, oh, sorry,
Oh.
you first.
Oh, happy birthday to me.
Oh, yeah, that's the skewer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's a great one.
I love that we see things in VHS covers because I worked at a video store for like 8 years. So, but Adrienne collects VHS, so we always are like, it's the one with the.
I just
thing."
remember that film as having Julie Brown in it, the original Julie Brown, not the downtown Julie
Oh,
Brown.
right.
Yeah.
Not downtown.
You should give the context.
Of
Sorry.
Night of the Demons? That's what I was gonna.
Oh, whatever
context.
one.
But just because it's a great movie and it's almost Halloween because every day is Halloween. It's like a classic story, but it's so much better than just like they are all going to a place and they're teenagers and they're gonna drink, but they all go to this abandoned home and they're like the most extra version of 80s teenagers, like in like
Every one of
crazy
them.
prom dresses and like nuts hair and like I've got a belly shirt
so
on and I'm a
goth.
dude. Yeah. And it's
I'm
just
a
like
goth.
yeah, it's like 2 hours of extended weird dance scenes. Somebody
Bauhaus.
pushes a lipstick into a body part.
Yeah.
And it just disappears.
No. I think, so what you just said sounds like one thing. It's not a body part that you can normally push things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a Cronin.
You gotta get
It's
it
like a
by now, right?
Cronenbergian kind
Yeah.
of situation.
And it's Linnea Quigley, so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So it's just very strange, and it's Halloween, so you should watch it for sure.
Really good.
Which brings me to how I want to wrap up, because we have a couple minutes left, so we got to be quick. Knowing that these people are except me, are dedicated horror aficionados, I'd like to hear from each of you a film that they really need to see that they haven't seen.
Oh, that is.
Pressure's on.
I know, I'm a jerk, but do it,
Oh, man.
please. I broke the panel.
You did.
Break it.
Because that's the thing is, like, horror fans pride themselves on their deep cuts.
Well, then maybe just rewatch.
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 Can we do rewatch?
Absolutely.
Rewatch.
Rewatch for
Clinton.
spring. Let's have a spring.
Death Spa. Death Spa is a 1980s film set in a deadly aerobics studio.
Oh, I'm there.
The Blu-ray came out a couple years ago, and I watched it actually for the first time, and it is now one of my favorite ridiculous horror movies of all time. And the bonus features on the Blu-ray tell you exactly why it's an amazing film. But anyway, highly recommended absurdist 80s horror film. And all you got to say is, you know, a slasher film set in an aerobics studio, and I'm there. So yeah, Death Spa, highly recommended.
Adrienne?
Well, dang it, Clinton. Now I see your Death Spa and I raise you Killer Workout.
Yeah, you were gonna say
Which
that.
I wasn't going to say, but I'm going to
I've seen
say.
Killer
Yeah.
Workout, yeah.
Killer Workout. Also, aerobics horror, subgenre of the 80s. People were scared. People were working out. They didn't like it.
That's true.
It's like a whole movie about Rhonda's aerobics place. It has original music throughout the whole thing, which is amazing. Extended aerobic scenes that are just fabulous, and the clothing, you'll love it. I love it so much I named my band after it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're really good. I'm going to say that you should go back and mourn Michael Park's passing, as I do really frequently, and see two of his final films again, one of them being the US version of We Are What We Are, which I thought was wonderful, and the other being Tusk, which is such a like killer role that he did in a horror satire directed by Kevin Smith. And just watching him go out in such a blaze of glory, that man was a treasure.
We went to the premiere of Tusk together. Do you remember? We went to the press screening of Tusk
I
together.
do remember that, and it was the weirdest, like, because it was like an afternoon, right?
All right,
they were like-
I'm moving us along here. I'm moderating here. Amy, what you got?
That was crazy.
I'm going to say original Fright Night, 1985, Tom Holland. It's amazing. I also really like the remake, though. I think
I
they
like
did a
Fright
really
Night
good job.
2 as well.
Yeah, Fright Night
Actually
2 is
really
just
good.
like off the rails. And then if you haven't seen the new Suspiria, if you're afraid to see it or you're worried about it, just see it. It's
I
amazing.
am she.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Let's please thank our panelists for talking to us today.
what about
Thank you all for coming. Thank you all very much for coming. Good job.
Yeah, thank you.